Flying over the Siberian tundra, it is cold. Winter records in this area of Russia reach 90 degrees below zero, and the region has been given names like the Pole of Cold and Stalin's Death Ring. It was once a place for political exile. Somewhere above the Arctic Circle, near the frozen Yana River, there is an aircraft wrecked upon the tundra. It fell here during World War II, one of the many planes to do so, and it is one of American origin. Searching for the Lockheed Electra is difficult. The snow is deep and the trees make it hard to walk. This is one of two planes without passenger windows and has larger fuel tanks added for a longer flying range. This is not, however, the airplane that disappeared with Amelia Earhart. It is its twin. The sound of the engine starting up on Amelia Earhart's airplane is deafening. The two Pratt & Whitney radios develop 550 horsepower each and have no mufflers. Earhart takes the aircraft out of the hangar into a pouring rain. This is a Lockheed L-10 Electra, specially built for Earhart and given to her by Purdue University. The passenger seats and windows were removed and larger fuel tanks added for a longer flying range. Also added are special navigation windows in the rear. It is March 17, 1937, St. Patrick's Day, and the first day of the world flight. Paul Mantz, a Hollywood stunt flyer, is flying with Earhart, as is Harry Manning, captain of the USS Roosevelt, and Fred Noonan, expert aviation navigator. Amelia Earhart is an American heroine, the darling of aviation, and a celebrity worldwide. Earhart began her long list of flying records at the tender age of 25. Now her 15-year career has brought her to this last flight. It has been raining for 3 hours, and this grounded all commercial flights. The crowd that was there to see her off is long gone. Left standing in the hangar are her husband George Putnam and William Miller, the U.S. Superintendent of Air Commerce. Amelia and crew are flying the first leg of the trip from Oakland to Oahu. This flight is very dangerous. Pilot Charles spoke with Earhart just before he attempted the same flight in 1934. He and his crew were never found. Earhart's aircraft rolls out towards the runway. The Electra picks up speed and soon lifts off into the dark afternoon sky, heading west. She flies over the Bay Bridge of San Francisco towards Hawaii. Miller then telegraphs President Roosevelt an excellent takeoff on a muddy runway. Captain Edward C. Music, flying a Pan American Airways Clipper, left Oakland prior to Earhart. An hour out from Oakland, Amelia took a photo of Music's airplane. He disappeared in his Clipper over the South Pacific the following January. The overnight trip from Oakland, California to Oahu, Hawaii is over 2,400 miles. After nearly a 16-hour flight, Amelia Earhart asks Paul Mantz to land. It is 5:40 in the morning. This is Wheeler Army Airfield, the place from where she had flown to Oakland just 2 years before. Then she had flown her Lockheed Vega, a single-engine airplane. Upon landing, Earhart is greeted by officers at Wheeler to discuss her trip. 4 days prior, a commemorative plaque has been placed on Diamond Head and dedicated to Earhart. An inspection of the airplane finds dry propeller bearings due to poor lubrication. These are disassembled for maintenance. Paul Mantz then discovers the fuel in the plane is tainted and plans to transfer the aircraft to the U.S. Navy's Luke Field for refueling. Mantz flies the airplane to Luke Field on Ford Island. This is the same place where the Japanese attack of Pearl Harbor will occur nearly 5 years from now. The next stop for Earhart is Howland Island, some 1,900 miles away. William Miller started the colony here at Howland in March of 1935. He arrived on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca as expedition leader. Also on hand were U.S. Army officers and officials from the U.S. Department of the Interior. In 1936, Miller came to Oakland to plan her flight. The flight out from Hawaii begins before dawn. Far down the runway, the plane can be seen to swerve in the twilight. Alex Coots, a Navy aircraft mechanic at Fort Island, said, "She seemed to be following the lights on the buildings, then suddenly pulled the plane to the left." The aircraft collapses on the right landing gear and spins out in a tragic ground loop. George Putnam picks up a call in Oakland. It is the Associated Press with the news. "Have you heard? They crashed." Putnam turns to William Miller and says, "Here, Bill, you take it." No one is injured, but the plane is severely damaged. The next day, Earhart and crew take a ship back to California. The flight is over. By the mid-1930s, it became evident that war was on the horizon and that the U.S. would need knowledge of military bases established by Japan. Several attempts were made to obtain intelligence, however. So far, all these have failed. Another plan has to be developed, and the U.S. begins to occupy islands in the mid-Pacific. Don Fobel was the electrician and radio man who built the original Electra. He said, "After the wreck in Hawaii, the Electra was brought back to the factory and rebuilt by a special crew. We weren't allowed to see it." Bill Cole, an engine expert from Pratt & Whitney, is brought in to rebuild the two radial engines. It has been over 60 days since Earhart's attempt at a world flight. Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan are trying again. Earhart's rebuilt Lockheed Electra is released from the factory after repairs, and they fly from Burbank to Oakland to begin the second world flight. Mark Walker, a Naval Reserve officer in Oakland, is a co-pilot for Pan American Airways. He told Amelia about the dangers of her world flight because her airplane was so minimally equipped to go on the trip. She responded, "This flight isn't my idea. Someone high up in the government asked me to do it." This day, Amelia Earhart leaves Oakland in secret to test run the Electra on the way to Miami. Her first stop will be in Burbank, California, from where she left this morning. A year after Earhart's flight, Mark Walker disappears over the Pacific in a Pan Am Clipper. Some say it was captured by the Japanese. The flight from Oakland to Burbank is just over 300 miles. Earhart lands there at 6 in the evening and goes home. In the morning, she drives into the airport with her husband George. They live just 4 miles away in Toluca Lake. Burbank is the first of a planned 30 stops. Missing from the Electra is the navigation window, covered up during the repairs. A fixed antenna on top of the aircraft and a direction-finding loop above the cabin will allow them to communicate and guide them into each stop. A trailing antenna below the tail can also be seen. This will give the Electra a 2,000-mile radio range. Earhart's husband George and her mechanic Bo McNeely will ride along with them as far as Miami, Florida. They leave Burbank Airport in the afternoon, heading east. The flight was to be to El Paso, Texas, but the late departure made them change to Tucson, Arizona. They arrive about 6 in the evening. After landing, Earhart restarts the engines to move the plane. The left engine backfires, catching it on fire. Amelia pulls the engine fire extinguisher and it immediately goes out. The morning of May 21st offers a sandstorm over El Paso, Texas, so Earhart flew all the way to New Orleans, Louisiana. Arriving after 4 p.m., Earhart, Putnam, Noonan, and McNeely all stay in the hotel at the Shoshone Airport. The next day, they fly on to Miami for a 9-day layover to service and test the Electra. In Miami, Earhart briefly lands at Eastern Airlines 36th Street Airport. It is closed and there is no one in the control tower. She taxis up, then takes off, and a few minutes later lands at the correct stop, Miami Municipal Airport, just 6 miles away. There is no known reason for the mistaken landing, but there will be another later on. The approach to the field is fast. Earhart makes a hard landing at Miami Municipal's runway. Later, it is discovered that she damaged a landing gear strut. Earhart, Noonan, and Putnam go on to a hotel, while mechanic Bo McNeely stays with the Electra in the hangar. John Ray of Miami Aviation Radio Services is told to remove the trailing antenna. This will reduce the effective radio range from 2,000 to 200 miles. The direction-finding loop and the fixed antenna, however, are still in place. Dick Merrill and Jack Lambie are top pilots for Eastern Airlines. They flew a Lockheed Electra on the first commercial flight across the Atlantic from New York to London in May of 1937. Their plane, the Daily Express, had the windows removed, and it was modified to have extra fuel tanks installed for a longer flying range. Merrill and Lambie then fly the Daily Express to the Eastern Airlines Airport at Miami for an awards presentation. This is the same airport at which Earhart mistakenly landed when she arrived. Earhart, Noonan, and Putnam meet them at the event. Here, the two flyboys receive silver trophies for their achievement in front of 10,000 fans. Days later, Earhart and Noonan take a test flight in the Electra and are gone for 6 hours. When they return in the afternoon, the Electra's V antenna is moved back. This is done by Len Michaelfelder, the Pan Am radio shop foreman. He then gives a direction-finding loop to radio technician Bob Thibert, who installs it on the Electra. Bob said, "There had never been a DF loop on that airplane." More changes are made to the Electra's radio system the morning before Earhart and Noonan leave Miami. Earhart then asks Charlie Winner, a Miami radio engineer, to remove the low-frequency crystal from the radio, leaving an empty crystal slot. He tells her she'll need that on her flight. That frequency is used for Pan Am's worldwide tracking network. She tells Charlie, "I don't need that. I've got a navigator to tell me where I am." Earhart and Noonan leave on June 1st, and the next stop is across the Caribbean Sea at Puerto Rico. From there, they fly on to Carapito in Venezuela. At Carapito, she meets Pan Am station manager Harry Drake. He sat up all night to obtain the current weather information off the rugged coast of South America. Earhart refuses it, saying, "I don't need it. I got it all back in California." But that was 2 weeks earlier, and Drake remarked, "The most recent weather?" Earhart then flies her Electra to Paramaribo, Dutch Guiana, then Fortaleza, and on to Natal, Brazil. Natal was the last stop in the Americas, and the next flight would be to cross the Atlantic Ocean. They fly out in the early morning to cross the Atlantic. The French had developed the route several years ago, some 2,000 miles. Approaching Africa after a 13-hour flight, Earhart ignores navigator Fred Noonan's request to change their present heading, and she flies north to St. Louis, French West Africa. It is over 160 miles north of their destination. There is no known reason for this mistaken landing. This stop at the headquarters of Air France lasts overnight. After flying to the scheduled stop at Dakar, there is a 2-day layover for maintenance and repairs. Dakar has radio capability, but not on either of Earhart's 2 operating frequencies. The flight across Africa was charted by navigator Clarence Williams. He produced all the maps that guided Earhart on her trek. Jacques Sabor, the Vicomte de Sabor, coordinated the technical aspects of the stops, and helped with the international relations through the Middle East. In crossing Africa, Earhart and Noonan fly over French West Africa with stops at Gao and Fort Lamy. These are not the original planned stops and change as they cross Africa. They go on to El Fashir, Khartoum, and fly on to Massawa and Asib on the east coast of Africa. Earhart and Noonan are requested by Arabia not to fly over the coastal country, but to fly around it. She has a letter in Arabic in case they have to make an emergency landing. At last they fly near the coast at Gwadar, then fly on to Karachi, India. The Electra is serviced and fueled over the next 2 days at Karachi. Jacques Sabor was a World War I flying ace, and he is there in Karachi to welcome the flyers. In Calcutta, India, the plane is fueled again. This is monsoon country and the rains begin before they leave for Akayab in Burma. Akayab is a flight center for Imperial Airways, Air France, and KLM, the Dutch airline. The Electra leaves the city, but a monsoon forces them to return. Noonan stated, 2 hours and 6 minutes of going nowhere. After stops in Rangoon, Bangkok, and Singapore, Earhart leaves the Asian mainland for Bandung, Indonesia. In Indonesia, Earhart spends 3 days at Bandung. Top Lockheed mechanic Furman Gray and Pratt & Whitney engine expert Bill Cole have taken 2 550 horsepower engines to Bandung for installation on her plane. With her engines replaced, Earhart flies to Sarajevo. After discovering a problem, she returns to Bandung for adjustments. The following day, she flies back to Sarajevo and then on to Kopang. Port Darwin was the stop before the last takeoff across the Pacific. Here excess equipment is unloaded and left behind. Parachutes, a spare tire, and an extra steering wheel are seen lying on the ground. William Miller, the U.S. Superintendent of Air Commerce, built the Howland Island colony in 1935, was in Oakland to plan the flight in 1936, and now is in Australia in 1937. Earhart and Noonan land in New Guinea. A planned 2-day layover becomes 3 as Earhart and Noonan prepare to cross the Pacific Ocean. This is the longest flight they will make, from Lae, New Guinea to the next stop, tiny Howland Island. Howland Island is a U.S. territory and the nearest land to the international date line and the equator, also known as the lair of the Golden Dragon. The Electra is fueled and ready to fly. Earhart and Noonan leave Lae, New Guinea in the late morning. As they fly off the runway, the Electra dips within feet of the ocean spray. It is July 1st, 1937, and it will be a 20-hour overnight flight to Howland. Howland Island is the only stop on which Earhart has not yet landed. From there, they plan to fly to Hawaii and then back to Oakland, completing the world flight. But Howland Island is over 2,500 miles away. Of all the islands within a 1,000-mile flying range, this is the only one with a runway. The colony that was started by Miller in 1935 built the runway in 36 and 37, bringing to shore aviation fuel for the Electra. Waiting there with radios to bring in the Electra is again the U.S. Coast Guard. The cutter Itasca has a direction-finding loop like the Electra's, and they place another one on the island itself. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan approach Howland Island in the Electra. The first clear transmission from the Electra was at 6:15 in the morning, when Earhart states they are 200 miles out. Half an hour later, she asks for a bearing, states that they are 100 miles distant. Each time Earhart radios the Itasca, she cuts off transmission and never responds directly to any request from the ship. An hour later, at 7:45, she radios that she must be over the island, but that it is nowhere in sight. She also says that she is low on fuel. The nearest island group is over 350 miles away. 15 minutes later, she says, "We are circling but cannot hear you. Go ahead on 7500 kHz. The 7500 kHz is a military radio frequency she cannot use unless a crystal was placed into her open radio slot. 45 minutes later, she radios that she was on the line of Howland. Leo Bellart's chief radio man on the Itasca said, her voice was loud and clear, but it sounded frantic on the last transmission. Then it cut off. After that, there was nothing. No radio, no sound, and no plane. After 44 days of flight around the world, Amelia Earhart had simply disappeared. Upon Earhart's failure to respond, the Coast Guard cutter Itasca radioed on the loss of the flight and began search operations. Over the next 16 days, the United States would send in 9 ships, 66 aircraft, and over 3,000 sailors and airmen. They would cover 250,000 square miles of open sea and every island within a 650-mile radius. It has been 44 days of the world flight, just half of the last 90 days of Amelia Earhart. Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr. stated, "I know how Amelia Earhart absolutely disregarded all orders." Amelia Earhart is an American heroine, the darling of aviation and a celebrity worldwide. She was close friends with President Roosevelt. His next-door neighbor at Hyde Park in New York was Harold Vanderbilt. This is the man that bought and modified the Daily Express aircraft, the only twin to Earhart's plane. Earhart flying into the wrong airport at Miami may be a clue to the mystery of her disappearance. The modifications to her radio there may have been necessary to exchange the aircraft. However, it severely limited her communications. Incorrect stops and requests for another frequency may tell part of the story, but her communications right before getting lost were limited at best. The exchange of her engines in Indonesia also point to more than just a round-the-world flight. There was no question that war was imminent with Japan. Earhart stated, "Someone high up in the government asked me to do it." The most tragic element of the flight was the map of Howland given to Earhart. It showed the island 5 miles closer and a mile north of its true position. Where was Amelia Earhart? She and her navigator Fred Noonan seemed to just vanish. Was Amelia Earhart a spy? There are many theories as to the disappearance of she and her Lockheed Electra. Did she crash on a deserted island? The nearest island group is over 350 miles away, and she said she was low on fuel. Did she splash land into the sea? There were over 180 radio transmissions over the next few days, all claiming to be Earhart. Yet Lockheed experts tell us her electrical system would have shorted out immediately had she hit the water. Was she picked up by another ship? If so, no one has ever reported in. The United States Coast Guard and the United States Navy searched the entire region of the Central Pacific, also known as the Lair of the Golden Dragon. If there was a reason why Amelia Earhart disappeared, it was her radio. The following year, the airplane flown by Marilyn Lambie, the Electra's twin, was sold to the Soviet Union. An Earhart researcher once stated that if Earhart did not fly south of Howland Island, to the north, the first landfall is Siberia. Flying over the Siberian tundra, it is cold. Winter records in this area of Russia reach 90 degrees below zero. Somewhere above the Arctic Circle, near the frozen Yana River, there is an aircraft wrecked upon the tundra. It is a Lockheed L-10 Electra, one of 2 without passenger windows, and as well is fitted with extra fuel tanks for a longer flying range. It is not, however, the airplane that disappeared with Amelia Earhart. It is its twin. This has been the last 90 days of Amelia Earhart, Part 1, The Flight. Based upon the book Amelia Earhart's Radio by Paul Rafford Jr. This is Douglas Westfall. Thank you for watching.